With recent footage coming out of Ottawa of a freedom convoy protester being trampled by a horse and the authoritarian clampdown that's going on up north right now, we need to be paying attention and understanding the fact that when it comes to law enforcement as well as military, many of them will be doing their duty for too long before SHTF actually happens, and in many cases become part of the problem of SHTF themselves. So this is something we need to be taking note of now and watching, because what we're seeing right now is a lead up to SHTF in many ways, and we need to talk about exactly what we can expect here in the United States as well if we see any of these similar situations arise, because we know that in many ways these countries, especially with their current governing bodies, are going to be a mirror image of each other. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper. Today we're talking about how they'll be doing their duty for too long before SHTF happens. This is something we need to definitely pay attention to, because in many ways during a disaster scenario, you know that law enforcement and the military will be upholding their duty for a very long time, even further into SHTF than what we would expect. And although we like to assume that many members of law enforcement or the military would disobey orders if they meant crossing the line of constitutional authority, what we're witnessing in Canada right now would show us otherwise. And this is something we should definitely be concerned about, because many of the activities going on north of the border right now could easily emulate themselves here in the United States as well. So, preparing for things to get worse due to what's happening north of the border right now. And although we know we're going to have our own freedom convoy here in the United States, we also now need to see what the reaction of that organization is going to be based on this authoritarian clampdown. Then hit the subscribe button below, because I think we can expect things to get a little bit dicier here very soon. And I think both you and I should be expecting things to get a little more difficult for ourselves, regardless of what the outcome of this situation will be. Now, first and foremost, why will they be doing their duty for too long? Because what we're seeing happening in Canada right now is something that you should be concerned about. It's that many of the officers who are showing up to these events, even though they have a job to do, are still willing to do that job, even if it crosses the lines of constitutional authority. And I think we can expect to see the same things here in America, even if we don't want to believe it. Now, this video is not supposed to be about bashing law enforcement or the military or anything along those lines, because obviously we know that there is a very big need for law enforcement when it comes to keeping a civil society. And in general, I support what our law enforcement officers do and their struggle. And the ones that I know personally are very good people, and the ones that work here in my town try to do their best to stay civil and take care of business. And I have nothing against law enforcement as a whole. Same goes for the military. But I think what we should also see for ourselves, based on what's going on right now in Canada, is that even though many of these officers might be conflicted about the situation and might not agree with the leadership's directives when it comes to what it is they're supposed to do, they're still following orders. They're still going to go ahead and perform their duties, even if it means doing something they don't agree with. And I think we will see that up until the point of SHTF becoming undeniable, and in many ways that could hinder you and I's ability to be better prepared or get away from a situation that might be too dangerous. This is why this is so important for us to be watching right now. So, first you're going to say, well, Magic, this is Canada. It's not the same as the United States, so you can't really compare the two because of constitutional rights and all the other things. But here's the thing, okay? Canadian police swear to an oath to uphold the Constitution of Canada, just like they do here in the United States. So, and obviously the people up there have rights as well, that we have similar rights in the sense of, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, things like that, okay? The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has certain protections. And the main protections that would protect what's happening with this freedom convoy protest are from Section 2B, which is freedom of expression, and this would cover things like picketing, and there's some other protected things in there that are somewhat questionable as well. And I will put links to these government sources in the description as well as in the pinned comment, so that you can read these sections for yourselves to see that these activities are protected in many ways. And then there's Section 2C, which is freedom of peaceful assembly, and it doesn't protect the protect riots or gatherings that seriously disturb the peace. So obviously there's some interpretation that could be taken there based on what they can justify in the sense of action, but at the end of the day, what we've seen, at least from the footage that's been put out and from the understanding of what this movement is about, this is a very peaceful protest. And there's not anything similar to what's been happening, I don't know, maybe during the summer of 2020. Now, there are some police who might not agree with this and actually might hold their values to their core to the point where they won't get involved in what's going on there. And what I can say is that the Ottawa police chief, Peter Slowly, resigned because of the criticism he was receiving of inaction about these protests. But at the end of the day, we don't exactly know why he resigned. I'm sure there was a lot of pressure coming from the top, but I assume that this person was probably understanding of the Constitution and the protected rights of the Canadian citizens there and didn't feel it appropriate to take the type of authoritarian actions that we're seeing happen now that he has resigned. So this is an issue, and if you think that these things are only targeting certain ideologies, understand that he was actually put in office as a way to help bridge the gap and fix certain aspects of systemic racism, or at least that's what is reported in the news about his appointment. And then he was forced to resign in many ways, which hurts that cause. So even though you might be from a certain ideology, if you don't go with the flow, no matter what that flow may be, you're still going to be outed. And this is something that should definitely concern you as well, because they will eat their own if they have the ability to, based on the fact that you're not towing the line. Now, here's the thing. When you compare what's happening to the Freedom Convoy and then you compare what happened during the riots of the summer of 2020, a lot of people will say, well, you know, obviously there was a lot of force used then and you weren't upset about that, Magic, or obviously these same provisions were used during those protests as well and there doesn't seem to be the same outrage. Well, here's the thing. First off and foremost, the Freedom Convoy, at least to my knowledge, hasn't burned any buildings down or looted or done any of the things that we saw happening during those times. And riots would not be protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So that is something to keep in mind when you're comparing the two. Now, the other thing you have to understand is not only are these clampdown measures coming into place where over 100 protesters have been arrested and you have people being hurt, you know, and you also have the fact that people are being doxxed for supporting these people and everything else, but we also have freezing of bank accounts and the seizure of crypto wallets happening, okay? And this is a big deal because these things are actually going on right this second to the people up there. And we have to understand that crypto experts are coming out and saying, look, this could happen in the United States just as well as it's happening in Canada right now. There's no reason to believe that your assets are safe if you were ever to be involved in any kind of dissidence, okay? Now understand that if you don't have your crypto in hardware form, aka downloaded blockchain style onto a flash drive, then it has the ability to be seized. And that goes the same with your bank accounts. And this is why a lot of people are pulling cash out and getting their assets in order that aren't as easily seized for many reasons. But I think this is going to escalate the problem even further. And obviously what's going on in Ottawa right now is going to push more of the Freedom Convoy supporters to do even more action. So this whole thing is going to get more and more contentious as it goes on. Now, here's something you also want to do when you compare the riots of 2020, right, and the Freedom Convoy protest. And this should show you the double standard and the issues with why the ideology is pushing a certain direction and why this issue of power is being applied differently based on the different types of thought process related to these events, okay? So do a quick search of, and you know, we'll just call it Bureau of Land Management, you know what I mean, activists bank accounts frozen, okay? Just to see if any of those people's bank accounts or crypto wallets were ever seized or frozen or anything like with what's happening to the Freedom Convoy right now. And here's what you'll find during that search. You're gonna find Freedom Convoy bank accounts frozen. Okay, you're going to find that China has frozen the bank accounts of a pastor back during the Hong Kong clampdown and other bank accounts as well, which is interesting considering China seems to enjoy spending time in Canada when their military is on vacation or whatever training they might have been doing there at one point in time. I don't remember. You maybe do. And then you'll also find an article that says Bureau of Land Management will not confirm who controls its $60 million treasury. So first and foremost, I only said Bureau of Land Management because I want to make sure people get this message, and if you say things a certain way, it can cause problems once in a while. And I'm doing my best to be as judicious and apolitical as possible in this conversation, but that's impossible in some ways. And I know that certain, let's just say, digital filters like to make sure that only certain people are allowed to talk about certain subjects. So that being said, understand that no, during those riots and everything else that was happening during the summer of 2020, people's bank accounts weren't being frozen, crypto wasn't being seized, and all these different things. And in fact, only similar behaviors happened in China when the Hong Kong protests for pro-democracy movements was happening. And at the same time, the people who were involved with those 2020 protests, let's just say, to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, right, that their large sums of money aren't even being accounted for or properly, I don't know, anything when it comes to regulation because, they're not even going to really tell anybody like who even controls it. And that's fine because it's just part of a certain ideology. But here is what is exactly happening in our world right now. People who aren't going with the flow and aren't following orders are being taken, aka torn out of their vehicles, put into confinement, fined, and a million other things, I'm sure. People are supporting those people, are getting doxxed, people are getting their bank accounts frozen, people are getting trampled by horses, and crypto assets that everyone thought were safe from the government because they're not, currency, are being taken. Interesting, isn't it? Now, that's why this is so important for us to actually look at, watch, pay attention to. This could easily happen in the United States as well. And what's going on up there is, at the end of the day, unacceptable. And there are people in the Canadian government who are fighting this whole situation, of course, but the government has the Emergencies Act already invoked, which allows them a lot of powers they wouldn't have otherwise had, which could be part of the reason why this police chief resigned. And there are good people in law enforcement and the military who would not carry out, directives that were unconstitutional, and I guarantee you that. But I do think there's a lot who would. And I do think there's a big problem with people being too comfortable in their situation that they would rather sacrifice their pride and, constitutional oath than to sacrifice their comfort when it comes to a paycheck and their ability to go home at the end of the day and do what it is they do, aka play World of Warcraft for 17 hours. So, these things are big considerations, and if big SHTF events were to occur, you have to assume that law enforcement and military, especially if you're in a big major metropolitan area, not like where I live, but if you're in a big city, you're going to find yourself dealing with those people in a negative way, most likely, for quite a while, even further into SHTF than what you would expect, because many of them are going to carry out their orders, no matter what those orders are, for a very long time until they finally see the writing on the wall that things are never going to go back to the way they were before, and that what they're doing in the sense of carrying out their duty isn't as important as just basic survival. And that's going to be a big decision that has to be made in the field in the nick of time for those people to stay alive. And if you're relying on that for your survival, then you're doing yourself a disservice because you're going to find yourself in a bad situation very fast. And we all know that the more tense the situation gets and the longer that these protests and these interactions go on for, the more escalated the tension is going to become, which leads to very negative consequences down the road. And that's not something we want to see, okay? So, there's a lot of bad things happening right now. We have to keep an eye out for it. And we also have to keep an eye on what's going on up north because a lot of those people up there are just like you and I. And in fact, I'm only a few hours away from where they are. And it's unfortunate that, our Canadian brethren are having to deal with this stuff. And this is what happens over time when these authoritarian ideologues slowly work their way into government to the point where this eventually is the outcome. And we're watching it unfold right now in front of our very eyes. That doesn't mean the people of Canada all wanted this, as many of you might say in the comments, because that's like saying, most of this country wanted what our government currently is as well. And I feel like the numbers don't actually represent that. Now, do you? I guess that was a question for you, not me. Either way, what I want to say is that there is a thing called asylum, and it seems to be used quite often at the southern border. And I think that at this point in time, with bank accounts being frozen and with people being arrested and unconstitutional acts being carried out on the citizens there, that the same prerequisites for the need of asylum might exist. So if the northern border is as porous as the southern border, there's just possibilities there. That's all I'm going to say.